The topic for my presentation that I chose to do is the impact of executive functioning on ADHD and other disorders. So, ADHD is a disorder characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. So, inattention involves being unable to keep focus, hyperactivity involves excess movement that isn't fitting to the setting, and impulsivity includes hasty acts that occur in the moment without thought. It is also one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders, and it's usually diagnosed in childhood. ADHD falls under an umbrella category overlapping other disorders such as autism spectrum disorder and ODD/OCD. Autism spectrum disorder is defined by impairments in social communication, restricted repetitive behaviors and interests, and sensory issues. ODD is characterized by hostile or defiant behavior. There's a commonality in symptoms between these disorders, including similar symptoms and affected brain areas. So a lot of these disorders have a large overlap in their symptomology and in the areas of the brain. And high comorbidities between diagnoses of these disorders complicate defining some of the symptomology and executive functioning deficits as belonging to singular disorder. So these overlaps make it difficult to determine where the executive functioning is happening just because of high comorbidities between disorders. So executive functioning difficulties is one of the central factors impacting ADHDers. So executive functions are higher level cognitive skills you use to control and coordinate your other cognitive abilities and behaviors. Three areas of executive functioning are working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. So some of the abilities that this includes are adaptable thinking, planning, self-monitoring, working memory, time management, and organization. So you can see how lacking in some of these abilities can affect somebody's daily life and daily functioning. So where in the brain are executive functioning abilities located? So the executive system involves the prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, and thalamus. And as quoted by Rosello et al., a broad range of processes associated with the prefrontal and thalamic reticular areas of the brain, responsible for directing and regulating conditions, emotions, and behavior in order to reach a common goal. So it's mostly located up in the frontal lobe of the brain, and this kind of coordinates our tasks and how we regulate with other regions of the brain. Okay, so some of the effects of executive functioning difficulties include difficulty multitasking, which is something generally we struggle with in general, depression, difficulty setting schedules, trouble regulating emotions, difficulty with learning and processing information, problem-solving issues, impulsivity, loss of motivation, memory problems, socially inappropriate behavior, difficulty getting along with others, completing tasks, and lacking ability to handle frustration. And then here I thought an important quote was that the problem of ADHD is not a problem of lack of knowledge, but rather of the application of what is known in the context and at the right moment due to an executive functioning deficit. So I think this is important because a lot of people, I think, have sort of biases against people with ADHD or people with themselves with ADHD, thinking that they are slow or this is a problem of intelligence, but instead it's more so about like the recall and organization of information in the brain, how that relates to the body and nervous system also. So now I want to speak on executive functioning across ADHD, autism, and ADHD. So ADHD and autism have a 40% co-occurring rate, which means this is a high rate in comorbidity between the disorders. This means it may be hard to distinguish which effects of executive functioning are due to which disorder. And ADHD is the name for the co-occurring condition. And in a study by Johnson et al., they looked at autism without co-occurring ADHD in order to try to pinpoint where executive functioning difficulties come from, if it's just from the ADHD or if it's a separate factor. And in their research, they found that it actually is an additional co-occurring condition. So This study looked at executive functioning and learning in academics. So, executive functioning affects many processes necessary for learning and academic success, as we saw earlier in the slides. So, a study by Rosello et al. Suggested the overlap in learning behaviors and executive functioning abilities in children. The study ended up finding overlaps in the effects on academic access between autism and ADHD, and confirms the association between executive functioning and learning behaviors. And this shows the importance of metacognition and behavioral regulation behaviors in academic enablers. So this is kind of showing how the attitudes and behaviors that affect children's participation in the class and overall affect their academic performance. Lastly, I thought it would be important to look at executive functioning and overall quality of life. So there were studies have been conducted to explore the impact of executive functioning difficulties in ADHD adults. So previous studies have found it has an overall impact on adults as a whole, but more current studies by Thorell et al. Found that through self-ratings, working memory was shown to be significantly related to all aspects of quality of life, and inhibition was also significantly related to the relationship subscale. So this study kind of looked at how executive functioning difficulties overall negatively impacted aspects of quality of life, and how certain inhibitory related issues in the brain negatively affected the relationships of people with ADHD. And lastly, the conclusion is that ADHD is the most common neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. It overlaps with other disorders such as autism, ODD, and OCD. One of the central factors is executive functioning difficulties, and they have a large impact on all areas of life, such as academic, social, occupational, and self-regulatory processes. And because of this, it impacts overall quality of life in people who have these disorders and have executive functioning difficulties. And that is it for my PowerPoint, and I appreciate you listening, and thank you.